Well, it's been a while since I've done a reading of one of my stories, and I guess to celebrate the extended version of my first book being released, I'm going to read a story that is a bit frightening, but in like a dark, humorous kind of way. It's called Product Recall. I hope you enjoy it. What the hell is this survey on? A kid's toy or something? This was asked by an overweight woman to the rest of the room and the people seated in it with her. It was a casual attempt to start group conversation and to kill time with the 10 or so strangers she found herself sitting in that very same room with. "And I don't see any kids here," exclaimed an overweight man seated directly across from the woman. They shared a laugh. Everyone else remained silent. Another man, let's call him Jim Rat, dressed in non-matching red sweatpants and a green sweatshirt with yellow sleeves for some reason, update, traffic light, Jim Rat, sitting on her left, spoke next. "So what are we supposed to be doing here anyways?" "Well, I guess that if a product appeals to adults as well as children, they'll feel like they'll play with the fucking things too. Like, ironically. Or nostalgia, something like that. I mean, I've seen people in their 40s playing that game Pokemon Go. I worked with a guy that had a Hello Kitty tattoo," I replied, trying to be helpful. "Hello Kitty is popular?" replied the overweight man. No, I answered. The woman's conversation starter failed. I had killed it. The room returned to uncomfortable silence. There were 11 people total that had replied to and showed up for the focus group, including myself. We arrived at 11 a.m. or thereabouts and were escorted into a soundproof room with no windows and poor air circulation. This was part of quality control, and quality control was paramount. The room itself had been engineered to that end, to shut us off from the world. Because of how this room was designed, all 11 of us were oblivious to the sound of the Dongbeng 41 nuclear warhead that had struck Lawrence, Massachusetts, just a few miles from Andover, where this focus group was being held. We were likely the only people that didn't feel or hear it within 50 miles of ground zero. What is a Dongbeng 41, you ask? Well, obviously something bad. Dongbeng 41 is the nickname. World enders apparently have friendly monikers these days, for a kind of ICBM developed by the People's Republic of China in 2012. It had been reported on quite extensively in various media outlets prior to usage that day, 10 years later. But who pays attention to that kind of stuff when there's a badass new iPhone model? Or Pete Davidson and Kim Kardashian's torrid 9-month relationship tragically has ended. I actually learned about them one night, the missiles that is, a couple months ago while I was doom scrolling on my cell phone at 4 a.m. I guess nuclear weaponry is one of those things that you read about and then scare yourself shitless thinking about how you could do absolutely jack shit about their existence. The one thing that stuck with me about these mass extinctions in a can was that just one carried 10 individual warheads in it. Each of these warheads would split off upon re-entry from the lower atmosphere and then carry on to their individual targets. Just 32 of these bad boys launched from China could wipe out every single municipality that qualified as a city, i.e. 50,000 people or more, in the entire continental United States. Now, some of you are familiar with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and are probably asking why Lawrence, of all fucking places, was the target of a warhead. After all, it's not exactly what one would think of as a strategic location to take out. Lawrence isn't known for much outside of random gas mains in the city exploding various houses to bits, and that was a few years ago. Also, being kind of a shithole. In deference to any citizens of Lawrence, if the entire population of that city had been evacuated prior to its decimation, the People's Republic of China would have been doing Massachusetts a kind of favor. Alas, Lawrence is as Lawrence does, and well, the people there were no mas. A lot of people called that city home, however, and home is still home. We sat in silence for a few minutes before a generic-looking executive entered the room. He had a navy sport coat and pants with a red tie. This man would have been otherwise unremarkable, except for the look of pure terror that contorted his facial features. In retrospect, it was obvious that he had just learned that this was no ordinary Thursday, but Armageddon Thursday, and the world that he knew had come to a swift and brutal and fiery end. Pure terror, of course, was not a power look. Generic executives are supposed to be ambitious, or so someone would think. To a person, the 11 people that had the time and lack of gainful employment to be able to show up for a midweek complimentary $75 Amazon gift card and free Chisana Senshi toy were obviously alien to anything executive. Seeing this generic executive look as if his boss had threatened to cut off one of his testicles moments earlier was alarming to all of us there. A good morning, everyone, and thank you for your participation in today's focus group. Funko International values its customers and places your satisfaction first above everything. From our new line of 7G cellular telephones to our proprietary HomeStar security system, the future is... The executive stopped mid-sentence, as if he couldn't recall the last part of the Funko International company motto at that moment. This was the easiest part of the spiel, and yet it had eluded his memory somehow. Everyone on the planet knew the company motto, which was also the tagline at the end of every commercial for every one of Funko's 100-plus products. There was a woman who looked as if she owned 17 cats and had forgotten how to interact with other human beings sitting right to my right. She knew the tagline by heart and finished the sentence for generic executive. "The future is infinite," she exclaimed. Cat Lady was very proud of her contribution. Generic executive then responded with the weakest affirmative ever uttered by a human being in history. A ghost would have asked him to speak up. "That's correct, ma'am." A few moments of silence followed. Generic executive was sweating profusely, but I thought I might have been the only one sitting close enough to him to notice how profusely. I reached over and grabbed his elbow. "Hey, man, you okay?" He composed himself, shook his head, and seemed to refocus. "And with that, the show must go on." He picked up a small device from the large table in the center of the room and pointed at the flat screen on the opposite wall. The Funko logo appeared, and then the movie began. Generic executive turned and made his way to leave. He opened the door, stopped, and turned halfway as if to say something else. He then decided in that moment to not inform us about the end of civilization and departed, closing the door behind him. I later discovered the reason why he made that choice. By the time the Funko logo appeared on that flat screen, approximately 2 million people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had already been vaporized. The People's Republic of China must really have had enough of the U.S., must have had enough of the U.S. being a thing, and went for it. The word "for" obviously being spelled with the number 4 because, America. The United States, for its part, managed no response to the attack. Not even a single missile. The president, having been re-elected in 2024 for his second non-consecutive term, was at the time focused more on watching the previously taped cable news segment. He could not be reached in time to authorize a retaliatory strike. Wasn't all on him, though. Turns out, during the Clinton administration, American policy of nuclear engagement changed from launch on warning to one that only retaliated upon sustaining that first full strike. China obviously took this into account and made sure there was no United States left after the first salvo. The 5-minute-long infomercial, product pitch, and audio-visual assault on the senses ended with a close-up shot of a child. She was cuddling with her new Chisana Senshi as if it was sent by God to meet her every emotional need. The marketing was poignant, appealing, and ruthlessly effective in targeting adult emotions. Buy this toy, and you can defer being the primary emotional support for your offspring. Buy this toy. You've done your job supporting your kids. Buy this toy. You've done your job providing happiness. Buy this toy, and you are a good parent. The screen went black, and the people sat there silently for what seemed like a half hour. Generic executive, however, did not return. Instead, the corpse of generic executive was in what used to be his office, 3 doors down from the focus group room. He'd taken the sterling silver letter opener his mother had given him a year before and opened his throat up ear to ear with it. As the crimson faucet doused his desk in blood, he dropped the letter opener onto the floor. In his last moments, he thought to write the word "Y" in the pool that had formed an oddly circular shape on his monthly planner. His final thought before dying was that his blood looked like an alien planet. He hoped that he could travel there in the afterlife. Maybe the answer to his question would be waiting there when he arrived. "Do you think he's coming back?" asked a man who used scented moisturizer seemingly on every inch of his body, and everyone could tell. Or, at least, he smelled as if he did. It took a little bit, but every other person in the room could make out that it was mint Noxema with aloe-scented flavors. Moisturizer man continued, "I don't know about you guys, but I think I'd like my shit now." His complaints failed to drum up any mutual support. Then a younger woman of about 20 or so scanned the table and found a stack of questionnaires. These were undoubtedly the surveys they were brought in to fill out. Despite her initiative, the girl really didn't give a fuck about getting the Amazon card or the toy. She liked the idea of giving false feedback to corporations to inflict a kind of minor sabotage on Funko, thwarting capitalism in her own way. When she had stood up to grab the stack of papers, I noticed she had a "Capitalism Sucks" t-shirt on. Her hair reminded me of Billy Idol's in the Rebel Yell video. Everything about her was on point for a budding young Marxist. Little did she know that Funko International wasn't really a thing anymore. Its corporate headquarters was in Chicago, which also wasn't really a thing anymore either. Lots of things weren't things anymore as of about a half hour previous. Oh well. Moisturizer man reached for his phone after being handed his questionnaire by Rebel Yell. This guy was also set on sabotaging Funko, but not with the same kind of purpose as Rebel Yell. He cursed out loud when he remembered that their cell phones were connected upon everyone's initial arrival. The reason, they were told, was that their responses were to be as unbiased, uninfluenced, and organic as possible. The actual reason was that Funko wanted to prevent their participants from finding out about the 4 injuries and 1 death experienced by the children who had received Chisana Senshi prototypes to play with the week before. The unfortunate child who passed away had removed a small part of his Chisana Senshi, stuck it in his mouth to chew on it, and then subsequently choked after accidentally swallowing it. The injuries were all eye-related, as in 4 children had involuntarily become ideal candidates for careers in the pirating arts when each caught a stray, launchable part in one eye or another. Chisana Senshi was an inclusive toy and did not discriminate between left or right eyes. The 11 participants, including myself, set to work completing our questionnaires. The expedited removal of every American city from existence took about an hour, from the first launch until the moment the last warhead struck. That was my cat freaking out. The very last city to go was Battle Creek, Michigan, which had at least had a kind of tangential irony in name anyways. The designers and engineers who had produced the Dongbang 41, the field personnel who had conducted subsequent testing of its capabilities, and the government officials who commissioned its usage that day were all quite pleased with their results. An hour was as efficient as one could get in destroying an entire country, let alone a superpower. And much to the chagrin of the American citizens who ended up surviving that day, the emergency broadcast system did not, in fact, interrupt any program with an actual emergency to warn them of the impending disaster. Not that it would have succeeded in saving any lives. As previously stated, the whole thing took just about an hour. If it had kicked off the way that it should have, interrupting the Steve Harvey Show and similar programming, all the EBS likely would have accomplished was to set off a wave of panic and maybe an abbreviated period of civil insanity before the missiles began to hit. It was a nice thought, though, having an abbreviated period of civil insanity before the missiles began to hit. having an emergency broadcast system to help people sleep at night. But despite its semi-regular presence in the lives of television viewers everywhere as if a periodic, if alarming nuisance, the EBS was ultimately useless. "You've got to be kidding me with these fucking questions," said Moisturizer Man. He was about halfway through his packet and already demonstrated an inability to keep his frustration to himself. Before his bitching, there had been about 10 minutes of complete silence in the room as the group recorded their responses to the movie and their thoughts about the product itself. The questions were pretty standard, with the number 1 signifying a negative reaction and a 5 indicating positive, based on the context. An example of this format was as follows. Would you purchase this product for your child? 1, yes, regardless of initial retail price. 2, 5, no, regardless of any discounts or reduced price. There weren't any yes or no questions, even though no person on the face of the earth ever went shopping for toys driven by 1 to 5, scaling on multiple aspects of a given toy. Still, these were the kinds of responses that Funko was after to base their entire strategies for the marketing, distribution, and sales of their ridiculous fucking toy. Funko also needed the positive customer feedback to counter the negative that was about to be unleashed from the child injuries and child death. The first of the group to finish their questionnaire was Rebel Yell. No surprise there. She'd filled hers out like it was a coloring book, going from line to line and darkening the first oval she saw on each. Despite this IDGAF approach, it still took her close to 20 minutes to finish. And when she did, she closed the book, tossed it onto the center of the table, and then proclaimed her sabotage Funko agenda to the room. She also went on to say that capitalism would destroy the world, then snapped her pencil in half and tossed the fragments behind her back. I asked her, "You about done now?" She turned to me, face set to fuck you mode, and replied, "Are you done, man?" "No, but I'd like to be, so do you think you could just chill for just 2 more seconds? She frowned and turned away from me. There were obviously many other people who worked at the Funko office building in Andover, and none of them thought to alert us either as we were sequestered in the focus group room. That I'll chalk up to sheer panic, though. Generic Executive would be conceivably the only employee that committed suicide on the spot, however. If his manager hadn't been incinerated while he worked from home that day, he might have said that this dramatic action was a perfect example of his go-getting, self-starting attitude towards life. His colleagues, in making their futile attempts to reach loved ones, failed to see the big picture. They were all dead anyway, so might as well go out on your own terms. In short, no one would ever come to the focus group room to tell us of the disaster. Give us all time to finish that survey, though. In the ensuing hours, after the United States became so much cinder and ash, every member nation of NATO agreed to stand down and not escalate any further, meaning that there was no nuclear response from any of the other nations capable of launching a retaliatory strike either. The brutal efficiency with which the United States was dispensed with was the ultimate driver behind their decision-making, it being clear that China had more than done their homework and was likely very prepared for anyone else willing to step into the ring. Countries like France, Great Britain, and Canada were more interested in continuing to be France, Great Britain, and Canada, rather than showing feudal solidarity with their (former) ally. The world, as it had been, with nations holding knives to each enemy's throats and to allies' backs, was no mas. One country blinked, and every other nation state knew to keep their guns holstered and their eyes peeled, lest they become the next target. It was amazing to me how long the 11 of us were willing to sit in that fucking room waiting for Generic Executive to come back. Despite the questionnaires' length, none of the 11 focus group participants took more than 45 minutes to complete their questionnaire. The questions were ridiculous. To wit, there were 4 pages devoted to how well each of us responded to just the child in the ad. Was his reaction genuine? Was his reaction off-putting? How did the color of his hair affect how you responded to him? But these were questions important enough to seek the answers to in the apocalypse, apparently, and so we answered them. I finished mine 5 minutes after Rebel Yell. When I pushed my survey into the middle of the table, I looked back over to her. She lifted the back of her wrist up and tapped it, mocking how much longer it took me to finish than she had done. I responded by giving her the finger. 2 hours, or close to something like that, is a long time to sit in a room with nothing to do but make up preposterous backstories for strangers that occupy the same space with you. In that time, however, I imagine that Moisturizer Man had severe vanity issues after his wife left him for her personal trainer. Rebel Yell was a Simmons College poli-sci major that had just finished reading Marx's Wage, Labor, and Capital, and Cat Lady was likely the kindest, sweetest woman in the entire world, but suffered from undiagnosed schizophrenia for decades, and so on. I'm an idiot. Sue me. Guy I'd probably be friends with in real life, second new character, finally had something to say. It had been a solid 10 minutes since the last person to finish, Cat Lady, had completed her questionnaire. Something really weird is going on here, guys. Yeah, what the fuck, Moisturizer Man added. What should we do? Asked Rebel Yell. If we leave, do we still get our gift card? Asked Cat Lady. 11 reasonably intelligent people had sat in that room like obedient puppies waiting for their owner to return home from work for way too long before anyone spoke up. And that includes myself. Can I use my ADHD and vivid imagination as a defense here? Probably not. Everyone looked around at each other for someone to propose some kind of action. 60 seconds of "don't look at me, I don't know," and "why I don't know" expressions ensued before my lack of patience finally won the day. Oh, and my ADHD. I'll go check it out, I said, standing up. No, wait, said Moisturizer Man. The same man who reluctantly whined he wanted his shit was also the one that was scared to lose his prize if anyone there broke some arbitrary rule. What if we lose the gift card and the toy if somebody leaves the room? I just remember seeing Rebel Yell giving Moisturizer Man, "You're a complete fucknut, aren't you?" look. Maybe she wasn't so bad. I got up and walked out. Empty hallway in both directions. I checked a couple offices and found the computers on in both. Their owners had long since abandoned them, so I found nothing but screensavers and login screens on their workstations. Yep, something was definitely fucked, but it wasn't like there was a fire alarm. Maybe a staff meeting? I walked down the hall and eventually got to generic executive's office. The name etched into a metallic gold nameplate near the door was Tom Colton. His name even sounded like he'd been hatched in some corporate nursery a la Brave New World. Tom Colton, executive vice whatever. I pushed open his office door and saw his body slumped over his desk. Well, I wasn't expecting that. In a box to my right were 11 or so of the Chisana Senshi toys, still in package, waiting to be distributed to the group. On a chair immediately to the left of them was a small clip with a stack of Amazon gift cards. I found the booty. I strolled over and grabbed those little plastic shopping sprees. Fuck the toys, though. I continued searching. Our cell phones were in another box, sitting immediately on the floor to the right of the corpse of Tom Colton, executive vice corpse. Blood had run off his desk in a thin stream and stained the rug next to the cell phones, but not in with the cell phones. Thank Jesus. I found my phone in the collection and took a few moments to catch myself up on the day's events. Didn't expect nuclear war either. Cell service was no longer a thing either, but I'd received quite a few texts and news blurbs that had made it onto my phone before it became a fancy pants calculator, more or less. I examined the corpse. Letter opener, engraved, a gift from a relative probably, dropped on the floor to the left. On the desk near his head were the instructions for running our focus group. It is paramount that the focus group be carried to completion by 1 p.m. Press release regarding current legal issues surrounding the product to be distributed at 2 p.m. Ha! So that's why he didn't mention Armageddon to us. He thought he should still make sure the damn focus group got done, instead of acting like an actual fucking human being and telling us the second he found out that all that shit was worthless anyways. Because of a press release that was never going to happen, his work performance took precedence over telling his fellow human beings about the end of days. Told you, says his vaporized manager from beyond the grave. He's a real go-getter. At that instant, I attempted to come up with the backstory for why this man had cut his throat on the spot, or why, with his last moments, he wrote the word "why" with a finger in his own blood. And then, as terror and fear displaced any kind of rational thoughts I had left to think, why I had spent maybe my last Thursday on Earth wasting my life answering questions about a toy was popped in my mind. I have no idea how long I'd been standing there, asking myself why, but I must have been there a while, because it wasn't until I heard the piercing scream of rebel yell from the door that I snapped out of my fugue state. I looked over at her, and all I could do was smile. The only thing I could manage to say was, I found the gift cards. The Dongbang 14 is actually real. That's a real thing. Sleep tight.